Imagine waking up one morning to a news alert that the ozone layer, Earth's invisible shield high above us, was completely gone. Not damaged, not thinning, just gone. No warning. No time to prepare. The moment that happens, the entire planet would be exposed to levels of ultraviolet radiation that no living thing is built to handle. What used to be a layer of protection between us and the sun would suddenly become empty space. And from that moment forward, every second spent under the open sky would be dangerous. The ozone layer sits in the stratosphere and absorbs most of the sun's harmful ultraviolet B radiation. Without it, this intense UV radiation would flood the surface of the planet, especially in the daytime and in places closer to the equator. Within the first hour of exposure, people outdoors without protection would start suffering severe sunburns. Within a day, even short periods outside would lead to serious skin damage and raise the risk of skin cancer dramatically. Eyes would be at high risk too, with cataracts and blindness becoming a serious concern even with limited exposure. People would have to stay inside buildings with UV blocking windows or wear full body protection, including face shields, just to walk around during daylight hours. And it wouldn't just affect humans. Animals would suffer too. Livestock exposed to direct sunlight would get burned, and birds and other animals that live outside wouldn't survive long without shelter. Crops like corn, wheat, and soybeans, which feed millions, would begin to die off fast from overexposure to UV light. Plants don't have sunscreen. If this happened during the growing season, entire harvests would be lost. And we're not just talking about farming in one part of the world, this would happen everywhere. From the plains of Kansas to the rice fields of Southeast Asia, the damage would be immediate. Even in the oceans, things would start to break down. The top layer of the ocean, where tiny organisms called phytoplankton live, would take a huge hit. These organisms are the base of the marine food chain and are incredibly sensitive to ultraviolet radiation. If they began to die off, fish and other marine life would start disappearing too. All of this would start happening in just the first few days after the ozone layer vanished. This isn't something that would slowly creep in. The impact would be fast, brutal, and hard to stop. And this is just the beginning. In the next part, we'll look at what happens once the damage starts spreading across cities and countries, and how life on Earth would begin to shift in a matter of days. Within the first week of the ozone layer disappearing, entire cities across the globe would begin to change, not just in how they look, but in how people live. Streets would empty out during the day, schools and offices would close or shift to operating only at night. Outdoor construction projects, farming, sports, and even simple errands like going to the grocery store would become extremely dangerous without full-body UV shielding. Hospitals would be flooded with patients suffering from burns, eye damage, and heat exhaustion. Emergency services wouldn't be able to keep up. Cities like Phoenix, Dallas, and Los Angeles, places already used to hot sun, would be hit hard, but even northern cities like Minneapolis, Toronto, and Berlin wouldn't be spared. This wouldn't be a regional issue. It would be a global crisis. People living in rural areas, especially farmers, would be among the first to feel the impact on food. Within a matter of days, crops would begin to wither and die. The sunlight they need to grow would now be overpowered by ultraviolet rays that fry their leaves and damage their DNA. Entire harvests of corn, soybeans, wheat, lettuce, and fruit trees would be ruined. Greenhouses would become essential, but they wouldn't be able to keep up with the massive demand. In countries like India, China, the United States, and Brazil, food shortages would start to build up fast. And since this problem affects the entire planet at once, there would be no country left to rely on for imports. By the 5th or 6th day, military and government agencies would likely take over essential services in many areas. Public service announcements would run non-stop, urging people to stay indoors during the day and ration food and water. Outdoor areas would be covered in tarps or reflective UV-resistant materials. Solar panels, now overloaded by intense sunlight, could short out or become damaged from the heat and radiation. Power grids already stretched thin in summer months could start failing from the demand of increased air conditioning and emergency power use. Massive blackouts would become more frequent, especially in poorer regions that don't have strong infrastructure. Without power, staying indoors becomes more dangerous, especially in heat waves. Meanwhile, the oceans would begin to shift in a silent but deadly way. Coral reefs in the tropics would start bleaching almost immediately, dying off from radiation stress. Fish populations would decline fast, not just from the death of plankton, but from rising water temperatures and changing currents. Coastal fishing towns in Southeast Asia, the Caribbean, and parts of Africa would feel the loss in just a few days. For millions who rely on daily catches to eat, it would be a sudden and terrifying change. Ocean ecosystems would begin to unravel, setting off a chain reaction that scientists would have no way to stop. By the end of the first week, the planet would already be unrecognizable from what it was before. The skies would still look blue, but everything under them would be altered by the invisible radiation now flooding the surface of Earth. And next, things would only get worse. Next, we'll look at how the second wave of damage spreads, how entire ecosystems begin to break down, and what happens when Earth's most basic systems start collapsing. By the end of the second week, the disappearance of the ozone layer would begin triggering deeper, more permanent damage. Entire ecosystems on land and in the oceans would start to collapse. Forests, which normally absorb sunlight and carbon dioxide, would begin to wither. Trees in regions like the Amazon, the Congo Basin, and even the Pacific Northwest would show signs of leaf burn and cellular damage. Without the protective filter of the ozone layer, UV radiation would break down plant DNA at a cellular level. Trees would stop growing, leaves would fall too early, entire forests would go quiet as birds, insects, and mammals either fled or died off. It wouldn't be a slow change, it would be fast, chaotic, and unstoppable. Insects, which are vital to pollination, would vanish in huge numbers. Bees, butterflies, and beetles are highly sensitive to ultraviolet light. Without them, crops and wild plants that depend on pollination would stop reproducing. This includes food sources like apples, almonds, berries, and cucumbers. Within just a few weeks, the global food supply would shrink dramatically. Countries would start enforcing martial law around food production and transportation. What little food survived would be locked down and rationed. Grocery store shelves in major cities like New York, London, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo would be emptied within hours of delivery. As vegetation across continents died, dust and dry soil would take over once green fields. With less plant cover, winds would pick up dry particles and spread them into the air, causing massive dust storms in areas like the Great Plains, Central Australia, and parts of India and North Africa. These storms would not only make the air unbreathable, but would also carry toxins and radiation-baked materials into homes, cities, and water supplies. Respiratory illnesses like asthma and lung infections would rise quickly. Hospitals already overwhelmed from UV injuries would now have to treat people for breathing problems, infections, and starvation. The ice caps and glaciers, already under threat from climate change, would begin to melt even faster. The intense UV radiation would speed up melting across Greenland, Antarctica, and the Arctic. As fresh water poured into the oceans, sea levels would rise faster than ever before. Coastal cities like Miami, Dhaka, and Venice would face flooding within weeks. Combined with extreme heat, UV exposure, and food shortages, some areas would become entirely uninhabitable. Climate refugee numbers would explode. Millions of people would be forced to leave their homes with nowhere safe to go. Meanwhile, the animal kingdom would suffer massive extinctions. Amphibians, already fragile, would be some of the first to vanish. Frogs, salamanders, and toads depend on moist, shaded environments and are extremely vulnerable to radiation. Birds would stop migrating. Many would die in flight from UV damage to their eyes and feathers. Mammals would start to disappear too, not all at once, but in waves. Larger animals like deer, elephants, and bears would struggle to find shelter and food. Within 1 month, the planet would lose thousands of species. The natural world that people have known for thousands of years would begin to fade fast. And this isn't even the full picture. As we wrap up, we'll look at the long-term impacts on civilization itself. What happens when governments collapse, food systems shut down, and human survival is no longer guaranteed. By the second month, without the ozone layer, human society would be in full-scale crisis. Cities that once thrived with light, noise, and movement would fall silent. People would live mostly indoors, with windows blacked out and walls lined with reflective materials to keep the ultraviolet radiation out. Entire communities would become nocturnal, working and moving only at night, but even that wouldn't be safe forever. Food, water, and energy would run low. Communication networks would begin to fail. The internet, radio, and cell towers, overloaded by heat and power shortages, would go dark. Governments would declare states of emergency, but many would collapse under the pressure. In poorer nations, leadership would dissolve entirely as people fought to survive on their own. Nations with advanced technology might try to launch emergency space-based systems to shield parts of the planet, massive mirrors in orbit or high-atmosphere aerosols could be tested to reflect sunlight. But these projects would take years to build, time the world no longer has. Temporary underground shelters would pop up across North America, Europe, and parts of Asia. Old Cold War bunkers would be reopened. Some people would flee to mountain caves or deep forests for protection, but most of the population, especially those in cities or low-income areas, would have nowhere to go. Death rates from radiation sickness, starvation, and heat stroke would rise fast. Global population would drop sharply within the first year. Mental health would begin to deteriorate on a wide scale. With no sunlight that's safe, people would suffer from severe vitamin D deficiency and depression. Children born during this period would face developmental problems from both radiation exposure and malnutrition. Medical supplies would run out, and doctors would be forced to choose who lives and who doesn't. Even clean drinking water would be hard to come by as radiation starts to contaminate surface lakes and streams. Boiling wouldn't help. Filters wouldn't be enough. Only deep sealed aquifers would remain safe for a while. Animals that had once adapted alongside humans, pets, livestock, even urban wildlife would die off or go feral. Streets that were once full of dogs and cats would become empty or dangerous. Zoos would shut down, unable to care for animals exposed to deadly light every day. Farms would collapse, even indoor ones, without reliable pollination and power. Some surviving communities might begin hunting again, relying on smaller underground species or stored meat. But it would not last long. By the 1 year mark, the Earth would be a different planet. The skies would still look blue, but the surface would be scorched, silent, and changed forever. Crops, forests, oceans, and wildlife would not recover easily. And humans would face the ultimate question: adapt underground in small, isolated groups or disappear completely. The economic toll by this point would be impossible to measure. Stock markets would have long since collapsed. Trade routes would no longer exist. Currency would be worthless in a world where food and water are all that matter. Nations would stop functioning the way we understand them. A return to tribal, survival-based communities would begin. History, science, art, and culture would be left behind, sacrificed in a desperate race to stay alive. This isn't just a worst-case scenario, it's a reminder of how fragile the balance of Earth really is. The ozone layer, invisible and often forgotten, is one of the thin barriers that makes life on this planet possible. Without it, everything changes, and if we ever lost it completely, there would be no going back. Imagine stepping outside and feeling raindrops that sting your skin. The air smells sharp, like burnt matches. Trees around you look sick. Their leaves are brittle, their bark is peeling, cars are corroding, their paint stripped away like they've been left out for years. Now imagine that this isn't a one-time freak storm, it's every time it rains. This is the terrifying world we would face if acid rain became the new normal. And the worst part? We could already be on that path. Acid rain doesn't mean rain that can melt your skin instantly, but it does mean rainfall that's mixed with dangerous pollutants like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides. These gases are released into the air when fossil fuels are burned. From coal plants, car engines, and factories. They mix with water vapor in the sky and fall back to the ground as highly acidic rain. Right now, most countries have pollution laws in place to limit how much of this stuff gets released, but if those laws were removed, ignored, or just couldn't keep up anymore, acid rain wouldn't be rare, it would be constant. This wouldn't happen all at once. It would start slowly, probably in areas already dealing with heavy pollution. Think major cities like New Delhi, Beijing, or even Los Angeles. At first, people would notice changes in the environment. Trees would begin to die, not just from the rain itself, but from soil losing its nutrients. Forests would thin out. Rivers and lakes would become toxic to fish and wildlife. Entire ecosystems would collapse. Within just a few years, places that were once green and alive would start to look gray and lifeless. Buildings would take a hit next. Acid rain eats away at stone, brick, and metal. Famous landmarks would begin to erode. Statues, bridges, and old buildings would crumble faster than anyone could repair them. Skyscrapers would rust and corrode. Infrastructure would start to break down in cities worldwide. What used to take decades of natural weathering could happen in just a few years, and people wouldn't be spared. While acid rain doesn't directly kill you when it falls, long-term exposure to the polluted air that causes it is deadly. Respiratory problems would skyrocket. Children and the elderly would be the first to suffer. Asthma, bronchitis, and lung disease would become far more common. Rainwater would no longer be safe to collect. Crops would fail, not just from toxic rain, but from poisoned soil. Food shortages would begin. This isn't a slow burn disaster. If acid rain became the new normal, it could flip the way we live upside down in just a few years. And once it begins, stopping it becomes harder and harder. In the next part, we'll look at how this new world begins to spread from cities to countryside, from farms to forests, and how different places across the planet would start to fall one by one. As acid rain becomes a regular part of life, the damage doesn't just stay in the cities where it started. It spreads outward, pushed by wind patterns and storm systems that carry pollution across borders and oceans. Within a few short years, this becomes a global disaster. Countries that thought they were safe, places with less industry or more environmental protections, start seeing the same signs. Trees that once formed dense green forests begin losing their leaves and bark. Lakes once teeming with fish become acidic pools. Mountain ranges, once home to diverse wildlife, turn into silent, barren landscapes. Agriculture is one of the first major systems to start falling apart. Acid rain changes the chemical makeup of soil. It strips away nutrients like calcium and magnesium, which crops need to grow. Even if farmers try to fertilize their land, the acidic rainfall keeps undoing their efforts. Wheat, rice, corn, and vegetables all begin to wither faster than they can be harvested. Livestock suffer too, drinking contaminated water and eating toxic grass. Within just 5 to 10 years, entire farming regions collapse. As rural areas begin to suffer, people flood into cities, hoping to escape the failing countryside. But cities aren't holding up either. Roads, power lines, water pipes, all of it is being worn down by constant exposure to corrosive rain. Concrete crumbles, metal rusts, blackouts become common, and clean water becomes harder to find. And because more people are now packed into these already failing cities, disease starts spreading fast. Polluted air weakens lungs. Contaminated water spreads illness, hospitals are overwhelmed. The systems people rely on to stay alive are collapsing. Countries start to panic. Governments try to act, but it's already too late to undo most of the damage. Emergency zones are set up, and mass evacuations are ordered in some regions, but there's nowhere left untouched. Remote islands, mountain villages, even deserts begin showing signs of acidic damage. Rainfall, once a symbol of life, now brings destruction. And it keeps falling, storm after storm, year after year. Cultural heritage is also under threat. Centuries-old temples, churches, and monuments are fading away. Famous sculptures dissolve in the rain, their fine details eaten away in months instead of centuries. Museums struggle to protect artifacts from the humid, acidic air. Generations of history are being erased right alongside forests and farmland. In this new world, the damage isn't just visible, it's deeply personal. The places people grew up in, the land they once depended on, the skies they once watched for hope, it's all turning against them. In the next part, we'll explore what life would look like across the globe as acid rain becomes a permanent part of the environment, and how different regions respond to the crisis in their own desperate ways. As acid rain continues to dominate the skies year after year, the toll on the environment and human life grows even worse. Rivers and lakes, once sources of fresh water and food, become too acidic to support most fish and aquatic plants. Species start to disappear rapidly. Fish die-offs trigger a collapse in the food chain, affecting birds and mammals that depend on them. Wetlands, which act as natural filters and flood protectors, shrink and die off, leaving communities more vulnerable to flooding and drought. The forests, which once helped clean the air and regulate climate, weaken and vanish. Acid rain strips away the protective layers on leaves and needles, making trees vulnerable to disease, pests, and harsh weather. Entire ecosystems collapse as animals lose their homes and food sources. This rapid loss of biodiversity makes the planet less resilient to other stresses like climate change or new diseases. People's health also faces a steady decline. Constant exposure to polluted air and acid rain weakens immune systems and inflames respiratory systems. Cases of asthma, bronchitis, and other lung diseases soar. Drinking water contaminated by acid runoff leads to kidney and liver problems. Children and the elderly become especially vulnerable. Hospitals struggle to keep up with the rising wave of illness, while clean water and safe food become more scarce. Governments try different approaches to manage the crisis. Some build massive water treatment plants to clean the increasingly toxic water supplies. Others try to capture emissions more aggressively, but the damage already done means the environment can't bounce back quickly. The chemical changes in soil and water are long-lasting. Years of acid rain mean nutrients that plants and animals rely on are permanently washed away. Cities attempt to adapt too. They cover exposed surfaces with special coatings and plant acid-resistant greenery in urban parks. But these solutions are expensive and don't work everywhere. The economic strain grows as crops fail, infrastructure crumbles, and healthcare costs rise. Countries heavily dependent on farming and natural resources suffer the worst, while richer nations spend billions trying to hold the damage at bay. By this point, acid rain is no longer a rare or seasonal event. It's a harsh and constant reality for billions of people worldwide. The way humans live, work, and interact with the planet has changed forever. The full scale of the disaster is clear. The environment is collapsing and humanity is scrambling to survive in a world where the sky itself is a threat. In the final part, we will explore the long-term consequences and the potential paths forward, if there is any hope left to reverse or survive this devastating new normal. As acid rain becomes the new normal, the long-term effects reach far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Entire regions become nearly unlivable as soil turns toxic and crops fail year after year. Without healthy plants to anchor the ground, erosion accelerates, causing landslides and the loss of fertile land. Food shortages become widespread, leading to massive hunger and malnutrition. People are forced to leave their homes in search of safer places, triggering waves of migration and conflict over dwindling resources. The damage to infrastructure grows worse too. Bridges, roads, and buildings corrode rapidly under constant exposure to acidic water. Water pipes and electrical systems break down, leaving millions without clean water or power. Cities struggle to maintain basic services, and governments face the enormous challenge of rebuilding while still fighting the environmental crisis. These failures add to the daily hardship for people trying to survive in an increasingly hostile world. Human health crises worsen as toxic water and polluted air cause new diseases to spread. Hospitals are overwhelmed, and many places lose access to medicine and doctors. The stress on mental health also rises as communities face uncertainty, loss, and fear. Children grow up in a world where outdoor play is limited and clean water is a luxury. Despite the severity of the disaster, some efforts at recovery emerge. Scientists develop new technologies to neutralize acidic water and restore damaged soils. But these solutions require massive resources and time. International cooperation becomes crucial, as no single country can handle the crisis alone. Still, the scale of destruction makes full recovery seem almost impossible. The damage done over decades means the environment may never fully return to how it was. In this harsh new reality, humanity is forced to rethink how it interacts with the planet. Sustainable living and aggressive pollution control become more than just ideals. They are essential for survival. But the question remains, can we learn from this disaster before it is too late? The possibility that acid rain becomes the new normal serves as a powerful warning. It reminds us how fragile our planet is and how quickly human actions can tip the balance. The future depends on what choices we make today, whether we take care of the earth or watch it slip away into a toxic, lifeless world. Imagine a tornado so powerful that it shatters everything we know about storms. Right now, the strongest tornadoes we measure are rated as F5 on the Fujita scale, which tops out at wind speeds of around 265 miles per hour. But what if a tornado was even stronger, an F6? This kind of storm doesn't officially exist, but scientists have speculated about it because as technology and climate conditions change, extreme weather might become more intense. If an F6 tornado did hit the Midwest or NOAA, the area often called Tornado Alley, which includes states like Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri, the damage would be beyond anything ever recorded. Wind speeds in an F6 tornado would likely exceed 300 miles per hour. To put that in perspective, the strongest tornado on record, the El Reno tornado in 2013, had winds estimated at around 280 miles per hour. With wind speeds that extreme, the tornado would pick up entire buildings, tear apart roads, flip cars like toys, and uproot trees by the millions. The air pressure inside the tornado would be so low it could literally cause buildings to explode from the inside out. This kind of force would create a path of destruction miles wide and tens of miles long, wiping out everything in its path. Because the Midwest has many small towns and farms spread across vast open spaces, the tornado could hit rural areas hard, destroying homes, barns, power lines, and night crops. But it could also strike larger cities like Wichita, Kansas City, or Omaha, causing massive destruction on an urban scale. The tornado would likely move very fast, traveling at speeds of 50 to 70 miles per hour or more. That means the storm could tear through an area in just a few minutes, giving people very little time to react. Emergency sirens might sound, but with such little warning, many would struggle to find safe shelter in time. Even sturdy storm shelters might not survive the incredible winds of an F6, because tornadoes usually happen during spring and early summer in the Midwest, often in the late afternoon or early evening. Many people might be caught off guard while outside or driving. The combination of suddenness and sheer power would make an F6 tornado one of the deadliest natural disasters possible in the region. Over the next few videos, we'll explore what kinds of places would be hit, how the timeline of destruction might unfold, and what the aftermath could look like. But first, it's important to understand just how intense this storm could be and what would happen while it's raging through the heartland. If an F6 tornado tore through the Midwest, the number of towns, cities, and communities impacted would be staggering. Tornado Alley is home to millions of people spread across hundreds of cities and countless smaller towns and rural areas. Imagine a storm so massive that its path could be 5 miles wide and stretch for more than 50 miles in length. This kind of tornado wouldn't just touch down in one spot and disappear. It would carve a continuous trail of destruction across multiple states, leaving very few areas untouched. Major cities like Oklahoma City, Wichita, and Kansas City could be caught in the storm's path. These urban centers, with their dense populations and infrastructure, would face overwhelming damage. Skyscrapers and large buildings would likely be reduced to twisted steel and rubble. Neighborhoods would be flattened, leaving thousands without homes or shelter. Airports, hospitals, and schools might be heavily damaged or destroyed, severely limiting emergency response efforts. Even smaller towns and farming communities, which often have fewer resources to begin with, would be completely leveled. Roads and bridges could be swept away, making it nearly impossible for rescue teams to reach survivors quickly. The timeline of destruction would be terrifyingly fast. An F6 tornado traveling at 60 miles per hour would pass through a town in mere minutes, but the damage left behind would last for years. The storm would likely begin early in the afternoon, forming from a powerful supercell thunderstorm that rapidly intensifies. As the tornado touched down, people might see the sky darken with swirling debris and hear a terrifying roar louder than a jet engine. Within moments, the storm would unleash winds so strong they could tear the roofs off buildings and hurl cars through the air like toys. Power grids would fail across entire regions, plunging millions into darkness. Emergency services would be overwhelmed immediately as calls for help flood in from everywhere. In the hours after the tornado passed, chaos would set in. Roads blocked by fallen trees and debris would slow rescue and recovery efforts. Hospitals would be overwhelmed with injured people, and temporary shelters would struggle to accommodate thousands left homeless. The full scale of the damage wouldn't be clear until daylight, but it would be obvious that the Midwest was facing one of the worst disasters in its history. The next parts will explore what comes after the storm, how communities cope, respond, and begin the long process of rebuilding. Once the F6 tornado is past, the Midwest would be left in a state of utter devastation. The damage wouldn't just be visible, it would be overwhelming. Entire neighborhoods would be wiped out, leaving only twisted metal, shattered glass, and splintered wood where homes once stood. Streets would be clogged with debris, fallen power lines, smashed vehicles, and uprooted trees blocking every path. Emergency services would face one of their greatest challenges ever as they race against time to find survivors amid the rubble. Hospitals, many damaged or destroyed by the storm itself, would be struggling to treat thousands of injured people. Temporary medical tents might be set up in parking lots or open fields, but the sheer number of casualties would quickly stretch resources thin. Communications would be unreliable because cell towers and landlines could be knocked out, making coordination difficult. First responders would be forced to rely on radios and satellite phones, but even then, the scale of the disaster might overwhelm the system. Search and rescue teams would work around the clock using trained dogs, drones, and thermal imaging to locate anyone trapped beneath debris. Many people would be displaced with nowhere to go. Emergency shelters and community centers, schools, and churches would quickly fill up, but the loss of homes and essential services would mean many families face weeks or even months of uncertainty. Food, water, and medical supplies would become scarce in some areas, forcing relief agencies to organize massive aid efforts. The weather could also be unpredictable in the days following the storm, with rain and storms making cleanup harder and raising the risk of disease in flooded or damaged areas. Power outages would stretch across multiple states, affecting millions. Without electricity, water treatment plants and fuel stations might shut down, making basic needs like clean water and gasoline hard to come by. Many people would rely on generators, but fuel shortages and unsafe usage could lead to further problems. In addition, the destruction of roads and highways would slow down aid delivery and slow the arrival of help from neighboring states and federal agencies. The immediate aftermath of an F6 tornado would be a terrifying, chaotic time filled with danger, heartbreak, and uncertainty. Yet amid this chaos, communities would begin to pull together, helping neighbors and working to clear debris and rebuild. But the scale of this disaster means recovery would be a slow, difficult process that would test the resilience of the entire region. The final part will look at what the long-term recovery might involve, including the economic and social impacts that would ripple through the Midwest for years to come. The long-term effects of an F6 tornado hitting the Midwest would be nothing short of catastrophic. After the immediate rescue and relief efforts, the true scale of rebuilding would begin to sink in. Entire communities would need to be reconstructed from the ground up. Homes, schools, businesses, and critical infrastructure like power plants, water systems, and roads could take years to repair or replace. For many small towns, the damage might be so severe that rebuilding wouldn't just be difficult, it could be impossible without outside help. Some places might never fully recover, leading to permanent population loss and economic decline. The financial toll would be staggering. Insurance companies would face billions of dollars in claims, and the government would likely need to provide massive aid packages to support recovery. Businesses destroyed or severely damaged could close forever, leading to high unemployment in already vulnerable rural areas. Farms wiped out by the storm would disrupt food production, affecting local and national markets. With roads and railways damaged, supply chains would be interrupted, causing shortages and delays in everyday goods. The disruption to daily life would ripple across the country, showing how interconnected the Midwest is to the rest of the United States. Beyond the physical and economic damage, the social impact would be profound. Thousands of families would be displaced, many losing everything they own. Mental health challenges like anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder would rise sharply as survivors cope with loss and uncertainty. Schools damaged or destroyed would leave children without a normal learning environment for months or even years. Communities would need to come together to support each other, but the scale of the disaster might stretch local resources to the breaking point. Still, the Midwest is known for its resilience. Over time, rebuilding efforts would bring hope, and new, stronger buildings might rise in place of the old. Disaster planning and emergency response systems would likely improve, driven by the lessons learned from such a devastating storm. However, the memory of an F6 tornado would linger for generations, a reminder of the power of nature and the importance of preparedness. This hypothetical disaster shows just how fragile life can be in Tornado Alley, and why understanding and respecting these storms is so important for everyone who calls the Midwest home.